What would you do if your entire identity was built on a lie? For Frankie Reynolds, a rusted RV purchased with her last dollar would unearth secrets powerful enough to kill for, and a truth about herself she never could have imagined. The cab of the old Chevy truck had become her entire world, a cramped, rust-stained bubble that smelled of gasoline and old coffee. Frankie Reynolds sat in the driver's seat, hands clenched tightly on the steering wheel, staring down a lonely stretch of Arizona desert road. The heat shimmered in the distance, warping the horizon like it was trying to erase the future entirely. She was 30, but the lines around her eyes whispered of longer battles. Long days under the hoods of broken-down cars, long nights watching medical bills pile up, and longer silences after her mother passed. The truck's engine rattled beneath her, protesting each mile with a series of mechanical groans. She'd fixed what she could with scavenged parts, but some problems couldn't be solved with duct tape and determination. Just like her life. Once upon a time, she'd been the girl with grease under her fingernails and stars in her eyes, fixing up old Chevys in her parents' garage, promising herself she'd build something meaningful. But that dream had collapsed under the weight of reality. The bank had taken the family shop last winter after her mother's medical bills mounted beyond salvation. She'd sold off her tools one by one, each wrench and socket feeling like she was pawning pieces of her soul. Now she had nothing left but this truck, a bag of clothes, and one crumpled dollar in her pocket. No plan, no future. She hadn't spoken to her father or siblings in months, not since she'd stormed out after the funeral, unable to bear the weight of their collective grief. The arguments about selling the shop, about giving up what her mother had helped build, had left wounds too deep to mend with just a phone call. The road stretched before her, a ribbon of cracked asphalt cutting through the desert like a scar. She was heading to a junkyard outside Flagstaff, not because she had hope, but because she'd run out of everywhere else to go. A distant cousin had mentioned the place once, said the owner sometimes let people stay if they were handy enough to earn their keep. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all she had. What she didn't know was that buried deep in that graveyard of forgotten things was the beginning of her miracle and her nightmare. Frankie switched on the radio, seeking any distraction from her thoughts. Static crackled through the speakers, interrupted occasionally by fragments of country songs and talk shows. The signal faded entirely as she rounded a bend, leaving her alone with the rhythm of the road and the ghosts of her past. The gas gauge hovered just above empty, another concern for another hour. She'd make it to Flagstaff, or she wouldn't. Either way, she was out of options. The realization should have terrified her, but instead she felt a strange calm. When you've lost everything, there's a peculiar freedom in having nothing left to lose. As the miles rolled by, the landscape grew increasingly barren and beautiful. Red rock formations jutted from the earth like the spines of ancient creatures. Cacti stood sentinel along the roadside, their silhouettes stark against the brilliant blue sky. Arizona had always felt like home in a way other places never had. Maybe that's why she'd circled back here after her aimless wandering through Nevada and Utah. By mid-afternoon, the outskirts of Flagstaff came into view. She followed a series of increasingly narrow roads, guided by the hand-drawn map her cousin had scrawled on the back of a diner receipt. The asphalt eventually gave way to gravel, and the gravel to dirt. And then, rising like a mirage from the desert dust, she saw it. The junkyard sat like a cemetery for abandoned dreams, acres of twisted metal and sun-bleached skeletons of vehicles that once carried lives and laughter. The chain-link fence groaned as Frankie nudged the truck through the open gate. Dust billowed up behind her like a slow sigh from the earth itself. She parked beneath a lopsided sign that read, Bishop's Salvage, most of the letters hanging on for dear life. As she stepped out, heat wrapped around her like a wet blanket, and the scent of motor oil, rust, and regret filled her lungs. The ground beneath her boots was hard-packed dirt, dotted with patches of scrubby weeds that somehow managed to survive in this mechanical wasteland. The silence was profound, broken only by the tick of her cooling engine and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Out from behind a rusted stack of hubcaps came a man in oil-stained overalls. He was stout and sun-weathered, with white stubble on his chin and a wrench in his back pocket like it was part of his spine. A faded blue bandana was tied around his neck, and a battered straw hat shaded his eyes from the relentless sun. "You lost, sweetheart," he grunted, wiping his hands on a rag that might have been cleaned 20 years ago. "Not exactly," Frankie replied, squinting against the glare. "Looking for something cheap. Maybe something I can make into a home." The man raised an eyebrow. "You mean like live in?" She nodded, brushing sweat from her brow. "I've got $1. That gets me anything?" He chuckled, a dry, gravelly sound like an old truck trying to turn over in winter. "Depends what you're looking for. I might have something." His eyes, pale blue and sharp, assessed her thoroughly. Frankie recognized the look. He was gauging whether she was trouble, whether she knew her way around engines, whether she was worth his time. She straightened her shoulders and met his gaze steadily. "I'm a mechanic," she said, answering the unasked question. "Or was. I can fix just about anything with wheels, if that matters." A flicker of interest crossed the man's weathered face. He motioned for her to follow and led her through a crooked path of discarded metal, past gutted school buses, half-eaten sedans, and a refrigerator graveyard. The air shimmered with heat, making the stacks of rusted metal waver like desert mirages. Frankie ducked under a dangling car door and stepped over a pile of twisted bicycle frames, keeping pace with her guide's surprisingly agile steps. At the far edge of the lot, tangled in thorny vines and kissed by decades of dust, sat a rusted Winnebago. Its paint had peeled away like sunburned skin, revealing patches of raw aluminum underneath. One of the windows was cracked. A tire had long since surrendered to time. The awning hung in tatters, and the side mirrors were missing. A family of lizards scattered as they approached, disappearing into the shadows beneath the vehicle. It looked dead, and yet Frankie took a step closer. There was something about the shape of the RV, the rounded corners, the faded adventurer logo barely visible on its side. It looked like it had stories, like it had seen things, like it was waiting to be loved again. Despite its decrepit state, the frame seemed solid, the undercarriage relatively free of the cancer-like rust that had claimed other vehicles in the yard. The old man followed her gaze and smirked. "That thing's been sitting there longer than my grandkid's been alive. You're the first person to look at it and not laugh." Frankie ran a hand along the dusty siding. "Looks like it's still got bone." She circled the vehicle slowly, her mechanic's eye cataloging each problem, mentally calculating the work involved. The tires were shot. The external water and waste tanks would need replacing. The generator was probably seized, but the body was surprisingly intact, the frame still straight. He paused. Something in her voice, the quiet hope tucked beneath her exhaustion, softened him. "Name's Earl Bishop, by the way," he said, studying her face with unexpected intensity. "And this old girl, she's got a story. Not just any heap of metal. This belonged to a family once, a special family." Frankie looked up. "What kind of story?" Earl shifted his weight, suddenly guarded. His eyes darted away, scanning the junkyard as if checking for eavesdroppers. "The kind that's better left to show itself in its own time." Then he gestured toward the RV. $1, he said, holding up a grease-blackened finger. "That's the price, but there's a catch." She tensed. "What kind?" Earl's face grew serious. "You fix her up. Not for resale, not for scrap. For you. You make something out of her. Something that matters. That's the deal." Frankie looked at the rusted steps leading up to the door. She could almost see the ghosts of laughter, of road trips, of someone's kids spilling cereal in the back seat. She thought about her mother, about the life they'd tried to build, about what it meant to start over, even with nothing. "Why so cheap?" Frankie asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. "What's wrong with it that I can't see?" Earl's weathered face revealed nothing. "Let's just say I'm honoring an old promise. Been waiting for someone who sees value where others don't." The desert wind picked up, sending a small dust devil spiraling between them. It carried the scent of sage and hot metal, a perfume unique to this place. Frankie watched the old man carefully, noting the way his fingers twitched slightly, the tightness around his eyes. There was more to this story than he was telling. Something about his manner caught Frankie's attention. The careful choice of words, the way his eyes kept measuring her. "You weren't always in the salvage business, were you, Earl?" A flicker of surprise crossed his face. "Sharp eye. No, I wasn't. Worked for a law firm before this. Estate management, asset disposal. Retired 15 years ago. He nodded toward the RV. This came through unusual channels. A lawyer from Phoenix brought it here personally, asked me to keep it safe until the right person came along. And you think I'm that person? Earl shrugged. Maybe, maybe not. But you've got the look about you. Someone who needs a second chance. Someone who understands that broken doesn't mean finished. His words resonated somewhere deep inside her, striking a chord Frankie didn't know was still capable of vibrating. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the wrinkled dollar, the last one she had, and placed it in Earl's outstretched hand. "I'll make her shine," she said quietly. He grinned and handed her a set of heavy, rusty keys. "Then you just made the best investment of your life." The keys were warm in her palm, weighty with possibility and unknown histories. Frankie approached the RV with a mixture of trepidation and curiosity. The door handle was stiff with disuse, resisting her first attempt to turn it. She applied more pressure, feeling it grudgingly give way. The door groaned open, stiff from years of disuse. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mildew and abandonment. Curtains hung like torn rags. The dinette cushions were ripped, their foam spilling out like old stuffing. Dust coated everything like a memory no one had dared disturb. A spiderweb stretched across the small kitchenette sink, its architect long gone. The floor was littered with mouse droppings and the brittle husks of dead insects. But beneath the decay, there was space. There was potential. Frankie took a long breath. It burned going in, heavy with the scent of time and rot. But she didn't cough. Instead, she smiled, because for the first time in months, maybe years, she had something to build. Earl cleared his throat behind her. "You can stay here in the yard while you work on it. There's a shower and toilet in the workshop. Not fancy, but the water's clean, and I've got a spare cot if you don't want to sleep in there just yet." Frankie turned, surprised by the offer. "Thanks, I appreciate that. One more thing." Earl's expression had turned serious again. "People come around sometimes, asking about this RV. If anyone does, you tell me first, understand? Especially if they're wearing suits and driving fancy cars." Before she could ask what he meant, Earl was already walking away, his figure wavering in the heat mirage. Frankie watched him go, questions multiplying in her mind. But for now, she had work to do. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of sweat, dust, and silence. Frankie attacked the RV like a woman possessed. She ripped out the moldy cushions, tore down the curtains that crumbled at her touch, and hauled bag after bag of debris into the Arizona sun. Earl let her use his tools from the workshop, no questions asked, just a knowing nod as if he'd expected this all along. The work was exhausting, filthy, and exactly what she needed. Each sweep of her broom, each creak of rusted screws being pulled from the walls, was a step further away from the mess she had left behind. The physical labor left her too tired to dwell on her losses, on the father and siblings she'd abandoned in her grief, on the career that had slipped through her fingers. By the second day, she'd cleared out most of the interior. The RV was essentially a shell now, stripped down to its bones. She'd found a collection of forgotten items in the process, a child's plastic dinosaur wedged beneath the refrigerator, a tarnished silver earring, a handful of outdated road maps with routes marked in faded highlighter. Each item felt like a whispered fragment of someone else's story. Earl proved to be a surprisingly helpful ally. He let her scavenge parts from other vehicles in the yard, showed her where the water line was so she could clean up, and even brought her a sandwich at lunch. They didn't talk much, but there was a comfortable understanding between them. The silent camaraderie of people who spoke the language of machines. On the third day, as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, Frankie was prying up the warped linoleum in what used to be the kitchenette. Her crowbar caught on something unusual. When she struck the floorboard, it gave a hollow sound, different from the others. Curious, she worked the edge of her tool into the seam and pried. The board popped up with a tired groan, revealing a shallow space beneath. And there, wrapped in a faded plastic sleeve, was a photograph. Frankie brushed away years of dust and held it up to the light streaming through the window. It showed a family of four standing proudly in front of this very Winnebago, back when it gleamed with fresh paint and possibility. A father with glasses and a professor's bearing, his arm draped protectively round his wife's shoulders. A mother with kind eyes and a sunflower in her hair, her smile genuine and warm. Two children, a boy about 12 and a girl perhaps 9, grinning with the uninhibited joy of youth. The Grand Canyon stretched behind them, a magnificent backdrop to their family portrait. But there was something else. At the edge of the photo, partially torn away, was the arm of a third child. Someone had deliberately removed this person from the picture, but hadn't quite erased their existence. A small hand was still visible, clutching the mother's shirt. The tear was jagged, hasty, as if done in anger or fear. Frankie turned the photo over, written in faded blue ink, the Jamesons, Grand Canyon, Summer '89. And below it, in different handwriting, more hurried and desperate, remember Eleanor. Eleanor. Who was Eleanor, and why had someone tried to remove her from this family portrait? The name stirred something in Frankie, a vague discomfort she couldn't quite place. She sat back on her heels, studying the photograph more carefully. The father's face seemed familiar somehow, though she couldn't place why. His expression was one of quiet pride, a man surrounded by his family in a moment of perfect contentment. The mother leaned slightly into his embrace, her free arm reaching toward the torn edge of the photo toward the missing child. Frankie slipped the photograph into her pocket, intending to ask Earl about it later. But first, she wanted to check if there were other hidden compartments. This RV was proving to be more than just a fixer-upper. It was a mystery wrapped in rust and aluminum. Before she could contemplate further, the sound of tires on gravel pulled her attention. Not Earl's familiar pickup. This was the purr of a luxury engine, the whisper of expensive engineering. Frankie pocketed the photo and moved to the window. A black Lincoln Navigator had pulled up beside her truck. The vehicle gleamed in the afternoon sun, its windows tinted so dark they appeared almost black. The door opened, and out stepped a man who looked as out of place in a junkyard as a diamond in a coal mine. Tall, early 50s, in an immaculate charcoal suit that probably cost more than everything Frankie had ever owned. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his posture commanding. Even from a distance, she could see the glint of an expensive watch on his wrist. Earl emerged from his office, shoulders visibly tense as he approached the visitor. They exchanged words Frankie couldn't hear, but Earl's body language screamed discomfort. He pointed toward the RV, and the man's gaze followed, landing on the vehicle with an intensity that made Frankie's skin prickle. She remembered Earl's warning about people in suits asking about the RV. This had to be one of them. She considered staying hidden inside, but something told her that would only delay the inevitable. Better to face this head on. She grabbed a rag to wipe the dust from her hands and stepped out of the RV, squinting against the sudden brightness. The suited man's eyes immediately locked onto her, calculating and cold. His gaze swept over her, taking in the faded jeans, the work boots, the smudge of dirt on her cheek, and dismissed her in the same breath. Then his expression shifted, interest kindling as he noticed something about her face. "Mrs. Reynolds, I presume?" His voice was smooth as polished marble. "Samuel Blackwood. I represent Davidson Corporation's Acquisitions Division." Frankie crossed her arms. "How do you know my name?" A thin smile. "I make it my business to know things. I understand you've recently acquired this vehicle." He gestured toward the RV with manicured fingers. "I'd like to make you an offer. $10,000. Cash right now." The sum hit her like a physical blow. $10,000. Enough to start over, to get a real place, to buy new tools, enough to rebuild the life she'd lost. For a moment she was tempted, very tempted. "Why would anyone pay that much for this piece of junk?" she asked, suspicion hardening her voice. Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let's just say it's a Jameson family asset that we've been tracking for some time. My clients have sentimental attachments." Jameson, the name from the photograph. This was no coincidence. "It's not for sale," he said, the words surprising even her. "I made a deal." Something dangerous flickered across Blackwood's face, so brief she might have imagined it. A crack in the polished veneer, revealing something cold and predatory underneath. "Everyone has a price, Ms. Reynolds. $20,000. The offer hung in the air between them. $20,000. More money than Frankie had ever seen at once. Enough to solve every practical problem she currently faced. And yet, there was something about this man, about the way he looked at the RV that set off alarm bells in her mind. Earl stepped forward. She said, "It's not for sale, and this is private property, Mr. Blackwood." The suited man's jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake, both of you." He reached into his pocket and produced a business card, holding it out. "When you come to your senses, call me, but don't wait too long. Some opportunities expire." The threat hung in the air between them. Frankie didn't take the card, so Blackwood set it on the hood of her truck. "This vehicle rightfully belongs to the Jameson estate," he said, his voice hardening. "One way or another, it will return to its proper owners." Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked back to the navigator, each step precise and controlled. The engine purred to life, and the vehicle reversed in a smooth arc before accelerating away, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake. As the navigator disappeared down the dirt road, Earl turned to Frankie. "You'd better work fast," he said quietly, "and lock your door at night." "Who was that?" Frankie demanded. "And what did he mean about the Jameson estate?" Earl's eyes darted around the junkyard, as if checking for lingering threats. "Not here, come on." He led her to a small office, a cluttered space at the edge of the junkyard. The room was cramped, but surprisingly cool, an ancient air conditioner rattling in the window. Earl closed the door behind them and drew the blinds. "I told you this RV had a story," he said, dropping heavily into a creaking desk chair. "What I didn't tell you is that it's a dangerous one." "I found a photograph," Frankie said, pulling it from her pocket. "The Jamesons. And someone named Eleanor who's been torn out of the picture." Earl took the photo with careful fingers, studying it for a long moment. "Martin Jameson," he said, pointing to the father. "Brilliant man, archaeologist. Had a promising career until it all went to hell." He tapped the edge where the third child had been torn away. "And that would be Eleanor, the youngest." "What happened to her?" Earl's face grew somber. "Official story is she drowned during a family vacation in '89. Body never recovered." "And the unofficial story?" "That's where things get complicated." Earl handed the photo back. "And why men like Blackwood are still hunting for this RV all these years later." That evening, Frankie couldn't sleep. Blackwood's visit had changed everything. What had seemed like a simple renovation project now felt like something far more dangerous. She sat in the RV, the photograph illuminated by a battery-powered lantern, studying the torn edge where a third child should have been. "Remember Eleanor?" The phrase haunted her. Was it a plea? A warning? A message for someone specific? And why would anyone care about a decades-old family tragedy enough to offer $20,000 for a rusted RV? On a hunch, she began examining the RV more carefully, tapping walls, checking for more hidden compartments. If one floorboard had concealed a photograph, what else might be hidden in this rolling time capsule? Near the rear bench seat, one panel sounded different, a slightly hollow tone compared to the solid thunk of the others. Using a screwdriver, she pried at the edges until she found a small gap. The panel resisted at first, then gave way with a sudden pop. Behind it was a small metal box, the kind used for document storage. With trembling fingers, she pulled it out and opened the rusted latch. Inside lay a bundle of papers, yellowed with age but preserved from the elements. Birth certificates, medical records, newspaper clippings, all centered around a girl named Eleanor Jameson, born July 12, 1984, to Martin and Clara Jameson. Frankie spread the documents on the floor, arranging them chronologically. A birth announcement from a local paper, school records showing exceptional performance, medical checkups documenting a healthy, normal child. Then came the rupture in the narrative. One document made Frankie's blood run cold, a death certificate for Eleanor Jameson, dated August 17, 1989. Cause of death, drowning. But scrawled across it in frantic handwriting, falsified, she lives. And paper-clipped to this was a hospital photo of a small girl, unconscious in a hospital bed, with a distinctive birthmark on her wrist, a crescent-shaped mark identical to the one Frankie had carried her entire life. The world seemed to tilt beneath her. With shaking hands, she dug deeper into the box and found a newspaper clipping about Martin Jameson, a respected archaeologist who had discovered significant Native American artifacts in northern Arizona. The article, dated 1990, detailed accusations that Jameson had stolen valuable items from the site. His reputation destroyed, his career in ruins. A handwritten note was folded inside. "They're using Eleanor to control me. Reynolds will keep her safe." Reynolds, her last name. The implications crashed over Frankie like a tidal wave. Could it be possible? Was she this Eleanor? Had her entire life been built on a fabrication? She stared at her own wrist, at the crescent-shaped birthmark she'd always had, comparing it to the mark in the hospital photo. The resemblance was undeniable. Same shape, same position, same size. It couldn't be coincidence. With trembling fingers, she sifted through the remaining documents. There were more newspaper clippings, the story of Martin Jameson's downfall playing out in black and white, the accusations of theft, the academic censure, the loss of his position at the university, and throughout references to the tragic drowning of his youngest daughter, a heartbreaking footnote to a man's professional disgrace. But if Eleanor hadn't drowned, if she was, in fact, Frankie herself, then what really happened? And why would someone go to such lengths to create a new identity for a 5-year-old girl? Sleep eluded her that night. Instead, she pored over the documents, piecing together fragments of a story that seemed too outlandish to be true. Martin Jameson, respected archaeologist, had discovered something significant, something that powerful people wanted buried. His family had paid the price for his integrity, and somehow Frankie herself was woven into the heart of this decades-old conspiracy. The morning sun was just cresting the horizon when her phone pinged with an incoming email. The harsh blue light illuminated Frankie's exhausted face as she read the sender's name. Ella Reynolds, her sister. The subject line froze her in place. "Dad is gone." With numb fingers, she opened it. "Frankie, I don't know where you are, but I hope this finds you. Dad passed away last night. Heart failure. It was quick. The funeral is Thursday. Please come home. We need you. Even if you're still angry, please. He asked for you at the end." Grief ambushed her, stealing her breath. Her father, the man who had raised her, taught her every tool in the box, who had cheered at her high school graduation and helped her open the garage, was gone. And now, surrounded by evidence suggesting he might not have been her father by blood, the pain cut even deeper. She sat motionless as dawn broke over the junkyard, casting long shadows across the dusty ground. The documents lay scattered around her, each one a piece of a puzzle she'd never known needed solving. Now her father was gone, and she hadn't been there to say goodbye, hadn't been there to ask the questions that burned inside her. Tears carved clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. For a moment, her grief eclipsed everything else, the mystery, the danger, the uncertainty. She was just a daughter who had lost her father without making peace. When the storm of emotion finally subsided, clarity emerged. She couldn't attend the funeral, not with Blackwood watching. Not until she understood what danger she might be bringing to her family's doorstep. Instead, she threw herself into research. Earl, seeing her distress, offered the use of his ancient desktop computer in the office. Hour after hour, she searched for information about Martin Jameson, piecing together the fragments of his life. The results painted a portrait of a brilliant archaeologist whose career ended in disgrace. He had discovered a significant Native American site that proved territorial rights for a tribe fighting against land development led by none other than Davidson Corporation. Months after going public with his findings, the accusations of theft began, followed by his professional ruin. His wife Clara died in a car accident in 1991. His 2 older children, James and Anna, were sent to live with relatives. And his youngest, Eleanor, had reportedly drowned during a family vacation in 1989, though her body was never recovered. The official story was falling apart in Frankie's hands. Whatever Martin Jameson had discovered, it was valuable enough for someone to destroy his life over it, and potentially valuable enough to fake a child's death and create an entirely new identity for her. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Frankie returned to the RV with a fresh perspective. The vehicle wasn't just a home project anymore. It was a time capsule, a witness to events that had shaped her life without her knowledge. She ran her hand along the worn countertop, wondering who else had touched this surface, what conversations these walls had heard. She spent the evening organizing the documents, creating a timeline of events. Martin's discovery in early 1989, the family vacation in August where Eleanor drowned, the accusations against Martin, in 1990, Clara's death in 1991. Each event following the other with suspicious timing. And somewhere in this timeline, a little girl named Eleanor disappeared, and a little girl named Francesca appeared in the Reynolds household. The sound of an approaching vehicle jolted her from her thoughts. Midnight had come and gone. No one should be visiting the junkyard at this hour. She killed the lantern and peered through the cracked blinds. A pickup truck, not Earl's, pulled up beside the workshop. A familiar figure stepped out, broad-shouldered with a distinctive way of carrying himself even in the darkness. Luke, her brother. Relief and apprehension battled within her as she stepped out of the RV. Luke spotted her immediately, his face a storm of emotions. 3 months, he said, his voice rough with anger and grief. 3 months without a word, and I have to track you down to a junkyard in the middle of nowhere. How did you find me? Frankie asked. Ella's been monitoring your email location data since you left. She was worried you'd... He didn't finish the sentence. Then Dad died, and you still didn't come home. The accusation hung between them like a physical thing. I couldn't, she said simply. Couldn't? Or wouldn't? Luke stepped closer, moonlight revealing the exhaustion etched into his face. He was asking for you, Frankie, right till the end. Guilt and grief twisted inside her. I'm sorry, I really am, but there's something happening here. Something dangerous. Luke's expression shifted. What are you talking about? It's complicated, and you'll think I'm crazy. Try me. She led him into the RV, switched on the lantern, and spread out the documents she'd found. As Luke reviewed them, his expression morphed from skepticism to shock. This is insane, he murmured, examining the birth certificate. You think you're... this Eleanor? I don't know what to think, but look. She showed him the birthmark on her wrist, then the hospital photo with the identical mark. Luke ran a hand through his hair. Jesus, Frankie. He sat heavily on the bench. There's something else you should know. Dad, he wasn't just a mechanic. Before he met Mom, he worked at the Arizona State Museum as a restoration specialist. That's where he learned all the techniques he taught us. Frankie stared at him. What? Luke nodded, reaching into his jacket. When he was dying, he gave me this. Said I needed to give it to you when I found you. He pulled out a worn pocket knife, the handle polished smooth from years of use. It was his father's, and his father's before that. Frankie took it, the weight familiar from childhood memories. Their father had used this knife for everything from whittling wood to teaching them how to fix engines. He worked with a Dr. Jameson, Luke continued. Dad always said he was the most honest man he ever knew. When Jameson was accused of theft, Dad was the only one who stood by him. Cost him his job at the museum. The pieces were falling into place now, not just random coincidence, connection. Dad and Mom, they adopted you when you were 5, Luke said quietly. They never hid that from us, but they never went into details about where you came from either. They were protecting me, Frankie whispered, realization dawning. They knew. Luke pulled out his phone, tapping quickly. Let me search something. After a moment, he turned the screen toward her. Look at this. It was a digitized newspaper article about Eleanor Jameson's disappearance. The grainy photo showed a small girl with familiar eyes, standing between her parents at a museum exhibition. That birthmark, Luke said, pointing to the child's visible wrist. It's identical to yours, and look at the date, August 1989. You came to live with Mom and Dad in early 1990. Frankie felt the world tilting again. If I'm Eleanor Jameson, then someone went to extraordinary lengths to hide me. Why, boy? What did Martin Jameson discover that was worth all this? They spent hours piecing together what they could from the limited information available. Martin Jameson had uncovered archaeological evidence supporting Native American land claims, land that Davidson Corporation had been trying to develop for its mineral wealth. Shortly after going public with his findings, the accusations of theft began, followed by his professional ruin. Dad believed in Jameson, Luke said, scrolling through old news articles. He always said there was a conspiracy to discredit him. Everyone thought Dad was being paranoid. But he wasn't, Frankie murmured. He was right all along. Luke pulled out another document from the pile, a partially redacted adoption record. The child's original name was blacked out, but the birth date matched Frankie's. The adopting parents' names were similarly obscured, but their occupations were listed. mechanic and nurse, just like Frankie's parents. This can't be coincidence, Luke said, his voice hushed. Dad knew exactly who you were. He and Mom took you in to protect you. From Davidson Corporation, Frankie added, the pieces clicking into place. They're still looking for something they think is hidden in this RV. Luke looked around at the half-renovated space. What could possibly be worth all this trouble after so many years? I don't know, but Martin Jameson went to extraordinary lengths to protect whatever it was, including giving up his own daughter. The weight of that sacrifice hung in the air between them. A father who had sent his child away to keep her safe. Another father who had taken that child as his own, raised her, loved her, and gone to his grave without revealing the full truth. Suddenly they heard the crunch of gravel outside. Car doors slammed. Multiple footsteps approached. Luke moved to the window and peered out. Black SUV, 3 men getting out. One's in a suit. Frankie's heart hammered against her ribs. Blackwood. Who? A man who came by earlier, offered me money for the RV, said it belonged to the Jameson estate. She gathered the documents quickly, stuffing them into a backpack. He works for Davidson Corporation. Luke's eyes widened as the implications hit him. I think we just found Eleanor Jameson's long-lost sister, he said quietly, looking straight at Frankie. And someone's willing to do whatever it takes to keep that secret buried. Outside, footsteps approached. 3 men surrounded the RV, their shadows stretching across the moonlit gravel like reaching fingers. Sometimes, Luke whispered, his hand closing around the pocket knife their father had entrusted to him. We have to lose everything to find who we really are. The moon hung low over the desert as Frankie and Luke slipped through the shadows behind the junkyard, documents stuffed into backpacks, hearts pounding in their chests. They'd escaped through the emergency hatch Earl had shown Frankie earlier. A narrow passage beneath the rear bench that opened to a panel in the RV's undercarriage. As Blackwood and his men pounded on the door, they'd crawled through dirt and darkness, emerging between 2 stacks of rusted car frames. Earl's ancient pickup truck waited behind the workshop, keys already in the ignition. Frankie slid behind the wheel, Luke beside her, and they drove away with the headlights off, following the service road that wound around the back of the property. Only when they reached the highway did Frankie switch on the lights, accelerating into the night. They'll be looking for this truck, Luke said, glancing at the side mirrors. We need to ditch it soon. Frankie nodded, knuckles white on the steering wheel. There's a bus station in Winslow. We can leave the truck there, catch a ride to Flagstaff. Well, for 20 miles, they drove in tense silence, both scanning the road behind them for the telltale headlights of pursuit. Finally, Luke spoke. You okay? Frankie's laugh was brittle. I just found out my entire life might be a lie. A corporation is hunting me for some archaeological secret, and our father died without telling me any of this. So no, I'm not okay. The Winslow bus station was deserted at 2 a.m. They parked Earl's truck in the far corner of the lot, wiped down the surfaces for fingerprints, and caught the 2:45 a.m. bus to Flagstaff. By dawn, they were checking into the Desert Rose Motel under false names, paying cash for 2 nights. The room was basic but clean. 2 beds with faded floral comforters, a small table with mismatched chairs, and a bathroom with chipped tiles but hot water. As soon as the door closed behind them, Frankie emptied the contents of her backpack onto one of the beds. Birth certificates, medical records, photographs, and newspaper clippings. The evidence of a life she never knew she had. Luke drew the curtains, casting the room in a dim amber glow from the single bedside lamp. You should get some sleep. You look like you're about to collapse. But sleep was impossible. While Luke dozed fitfully on one bed, Frankie sat at the small table, staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, visible through the open door. The face that looked back was both familiar and suddenly foreign. The same green eyes she'd always known, the same stubborn jaw, the same small scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood fall. But now she saw other things too, the shape of her eyes resembling the woman in the photograph, Clara Jameson. The set of her mouth like Martin's. Features that had once seemed uniquely hers now revealed themselves as genetic inheritance from strangers. If she was truly Eleanor Jameson, why had she grown up as Frankie Reynolds? Who had orchestrated this elaborate deception, and what was at stake that justified erasing a child's identity? Morning brought no answers, just the harsh light of reality streaming through the thin curtains. Luke went out for coffee and supplies, returning with 2 large cups, a bag of breakfast sandwiches, and a burner phone. Called Ella, he said, setting down the coffee. Told her we're okay, but need to stay low. She wants to join us. Frankie shook her head. Too dangerous. Blackwood. Already found her, Luke interrupted. Someone broke into the house last night, tore the place apart looking for something. She grabbed Dad's personal effects and got out. Frankie's blood ran cold. Is she okay? Shaken up, but she's safe. She's on her way here. Should arrive this afternoon. They spent the morning organizing the documents, creating a timeline on the motel wall with pushpins and string borrowed from the front desk. The picture that emerged was disturbing, a systematic destruction of Martin Jameson's life following his archaeological discovery, culminating in the fake death of his youngest daughter. What could he possibly have found that was worth all this, Luke wondered, staring at the timeline. And why is Davidson Corp still hunting for it 30 years later? A knock at the door sent them both into alert mode. Luke peered through the peephole, then relaxed, opening the door to reveal Ella Reynolds. Their younger sister looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her normally neat brown hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail. She carried a battered cardboard box and a small duffel bag. You two look like hell, she said, setting down her burdens and hugging them both. What kind of trouble have you gotten yourselves into now? They spent the next hour bringing Ella up to speed, the RV, the hidden documents, the connection to their father, and the revelation that Frankie might actually be Eleanor Jameson. Ella listened without interruption, her expression shifting from skepticism to shock to grim acceptance. When they finished, she opened the cardboard box she'd brought. Maybe this will help fill in some gaps, she said. Mom's personal things. Dad kept them in a lockbox in his closet. I grabbed it before those men tore apart the house. The box contained a collection of Margaret Reynolds' most treasured possessions: jewelry, photographs, letters, and at the bottom, a worn leather-bound journal with a hospital ID card tucked between the pages. Mom was a nurse at Arizona General from 1985 to 1992, Ella said, opening the journal to the first page. I remember her telling stories about the ER, but she never talked much about her time there. The journal entries began as mundane observations about hospital life, difficult patients, demanding doctors, friendships with other nurses. But as they flipped through the pages, they found entries from August 1989 that changed everything. August 17, 1989, Frankie read aloud. They brought in a little girl today, supposed drowning victim, but something's not right. No water in the lungs. Appears to be sedated, not drowned. The father is distraught, keeps insisting someone is after them. Security had to escort him out. I've never seen fear like that in a man's eyes. The next entry was dated 3 days later. The girl is awake. Name is Eleanor. Sweet child, confused about where she is. No mother present. Father returned today with a man I recognize. Jim Reynolds, the restoration specialist from the museum. They spoke with Dr. Chambers for over an hour. Something strange is happening. I've been assigned as her primary nurse and told not to log her presence in the official system. Luke and Ella exchanged glances. Jim Reynolds, Dad, Luke said. Frankie continued reading, her voice growing tighter with each entry. August 24th, 1989. Dr. Jameson returned tonight after hours. He begged me to help him. Said they were trying to use his daughter to control him, to make him surrender something he discovered. Said if I didn't help, his entire family would be in danger. Jim vouches for him, says Martin is a good man being framed. I don't know what to believe, but that little girl's eyes haunt me. The next entry made Frankie's voice catch. September 8th, 1989. We did it. Eleanor Jameson officially died today. Death certificate signed and filed. But the little girl with the crescent birthmark is sleeping in our guest room. Martin says she can never know who she really is, that it's the only way to keep her safe. Jim and I have always wanted another child. We'll call her Francesca, after my grandmother. God forgive us for what we've done, but I look at that sleeping child and know we had no choice. Silence fell over the motel room. Frankie stared at the journal, her hands trembling. Mom and Dad, she whispered. They knew all along. They saved me. Ella reached across the table, taking Frankie's hand. They loved you. From the moment you came to us, you were their daughter, our sister. But why? Luke asked, pacing the small room. What did Martin Jameson find that was so valuable people are still hunting for it 30 years later? They returned to the journal, scanning through the entries that followed. Most were about Frankie's adjustment to her new home, her nightmares, her gradual acceptance of her new family. But one entry dated October 14th, 1989, caught their attention. Martin visited tonight, brought a necklace for Eleanor, for Frankie, said it's her birthright, that she should have it even if she doesn't know its significance. It's beautiful. Silver with strange symbols. He said it's the key to everything, but only she will be able to use it when the time comes. Jim insists we keep it hidden until she's older. Martin says he's hidden the map where no one will find it, but where she might someday. He talked about the RV, said it contained everything she would need to reclaim her heritage when the time was right. A necklace? Frankie looked at her antlings. Did either of you ever see anything like that? They both shook their heads. Wait, Ella said suddenly. The bottom of the box. She upended the remaining contents onto the bed. Among the scattered items was a small velvet pouch worn with age. With trembling fingers, Frankie opened it. Inside lay a silver pendant on a tarnished chain, a circular disc etched with intricate symbols. At its center was a design resembling a stylized mountain range, surrounded by what looked like a star chart. This is it, she whispered, turning the pendant over. On the back was a single word engraved in flowing script, Eleanor. As Frankie held the necklace, something clicked in her memory, a fragment of a dream, a sense of familiarity she couldn't place. The symbols seemed to shift before her eyes, as if trying to tell her something. According to Mom's journal, this is the key to whatever Martin discovered, Luke said, examining the pendant. And Davidson Corp is still hunting for it 30 years later. It must be something incredibly valuable. Or incredibly dangerous, Ella added. Frankie slipped the chain over her head, the pendant resting against her sternum. We need to go back to the junkyard. Earl might know more about this. Too risky, Luke objected. Blackwood's men will be watching the place. We can't just hide in this motel forever, Frankie countered. Earl is our only link to the RV and to Martin Jameson. We need to know what he knows. After heated debate, they agreed on a plan. They would approach the junkyard after dark, using the service road Frankie and Luke had escaped by. If it seemed safe, they would make contact with Earl. If not, they would retreat and find another way. As dusk fell, they set out in a used sedan Ella had purchased with cash from a lot across town. Frankie drove, Luke rode shotgun scanning for pursuers, and Ella navigated from the back seat. The pendant hung heavy around Frankie's neck, a physical reminder of the mystery that had consumed her life. The junkyard appeared deserted as they approached via the back road, headlights off, guided only by moonlight. No vehicles in sight, no lights in Earl's office. They parked behind a hill of discarded appliances and approached on foot. Something's wrong, Frankie whispered as they neared the main yard. Too quiet. The workshop door stood ajar, a thin sliver of light spilling onto the gravel. Luke held them back, pulling a tire iron from his belt loop. Stay here, he mouthed, edging forward. He peered around the door frame, then gestured urgently for them to follow. Inside, the workshop was in disarray, tools scattered, drawers upended, papers strewn across the floor. And in the center, slumped in his desk chair, was Earl. Earl! Frankie rushed forward. The old man's face was bruised, a gash above his eye crusted with dried blood. His breathing was shallow but steady. At Frankie's touch, Earl's eyes fluttered open. Knew you'd come back, he rasped. What happened? Frankie asked as Ella grabbed the first aid kit from the wall. Blackwood, Earl grimaced as Ella began cleaning his wound. Came looking for you. Wasn't happy when I wouldn't talk. We need to get you to a hospital, Luke said, already reaching for his phone. Earl's hand shot out, surprisingly strong, gripping Luke's wrist. No hospitals. They'll be watching. I've survived worse than this. He turned his gaze to Frankie. They took the RV, loaded it onto a flatbed. They're looking for something inside it, tearing it apart piece by piece. Frankie's heart sank. Did they find anything? Earl shook his head, wincing at the movement. Don't think so. Not the important thing anyway. What important thing? Luke pressed. Martin's secret, the map to the site. Earl's eyes drifted to the pendant around Frankie's neck. I see you found the key. You knew about this? Frankie touched the silver disc. Martin told me. Said his daughter would come someday, wearing the pendant. Said it was the only way to unlock the truth. Earl coughed, a wet, rattling sound. There's something you need to know, Eleanor. The use of her birth name sent a chill down Frankie's spine. Martin wasn't just my client. He was my friend. We served together in Vietnam. When he got in trouble, I was the only one he trusted with the RV. He knew they'd come looking for it eventually. Earl's face contorted in pain as he shifted in the chair. There's a man you need to find. Charles Logan, works at the Phoenix Museum of Natural History. He was Martin's colleague. He knows everything. What did Martin find, Earl? Frankie asked gently. What's so valuable that people are still hunting for it 30 years later? Not valuable. Important. Earl's voice dropped to a whisper. Evidence. Proof of native land rights, sacred sites. If it came to light, Davidson Corp would lose billions in mining rights. He reached into his pocket with shaking fingers, producing a small key. Logan has what you need. This opens his private archive at the museum. As Frankie took the key, Earl's eyes drifted closed. Martin would be proud, he murmured. You have his eyes, his determination. Frankie checked his pulse, steady but weak. We need to get him help. I know someone, Ella said. A doctor who makes house calls, no questions asked. She worked with Mom. They made Earl as comfortable as possible, and Ella called her contact. The doctor promised to arrive within the hour. With nothing more they could do, they searched the workshop for anything that might help them understand what they were facing. In a locked drawer, which Luke managed to pry open, they found a folder labeled Jameson. Inside were more newspaper clippings about Martin's disgrace, but also private correspondence between Martin and Earl spanning several years. Look at this, Luke said, holding up a letter dated 1991. Martin suspected Clara's car accident wasn't an accident at all. He writes that Davidson's security chief, a man named Hennessy, was seen near the crash site just before it happened. Hennessy? Frankie looked up sharply. One of the men with Blackwood at the junkyard was called that. Blackwood said something like, Hennessy, check the perimeter. So Davidson Corp's security chief from 30 years ago is still working for them, Ella mused. That's dedication to the cause. Or guilt, Luke suggested. If he caused Clara Jameson's death, maybe he's been trying to finish the job all these years. The doctor arrived, a silver-haired woman with quick, efficient movements. She examined Earl, administered painkillers and antibiotics, and announced he had 3 cracked ribs and a mild concussion, but would recover. He needs rest, she told him firmly, and probably police protection, judging by those injuries. But he said you can't involve authorities? Frankie nodded grimly. It's complicated. It always is. The doctor packed her bag. I'll check on him tomorrow. There's a cot in the back room. Someone should stay with him tonight. They decided Ella would remain with Earl while Frankie and Luke headed to Phoenix to find Charles Logan. The drive would take a few hours, putting them at the museum around opening time. As they prepared to leave, Earl called Frankie to his side. Be careful, he whispered. Davidson Corp has people everywhere. Trust no one you don't absolutely have to. The Phoenix Museum of Natural History was an imposing sandstone building with massive columns flanking the entrance. The morning sun cast long shadows across the broad steps as Frankie and Luke approached, trying to look like ordinary visitors despite their exhaustion and tension. They purchased tickets and asked at the information desk for Dr. Charles Logan. Dr. Logan is leading a tour in the Native American exhibit, the receptionist informed them. 3rd floor, East Wing. The tour starts in 15 minutes. They found the exhibit easily enough, a vast collection of artifacts, dioramas, and informational displays chronicling the rich history of Arizona's indigenous peoples. A small group had already gathered near the entrance, where a slender man in his 70s was preparing notes for his presentation. Charles Logan looked exactly like a museum curator should. Silver hair neatly combed, wire-rimmed glasses perched on a narrow nose, tweed jacket with elbow patches. His voice, when he welcomed the gathering visitors, was melodious and precise. Frankie and Luke joined the tour, hanging back from the main group. As Logan led them through the exhibits, His passion for the subject was evident. He spoke of the various tribes with deep respect, emphasizing their sophisticated knowledge of astronomy, agriculture, and sustainable living. When the tour reached a display of ceremonial artifacts, Logan paused, his eyes suddenly locking with Frankie's. A flash of recognition crossed his face, quickly masked by professional composure. "This particular ceremonial necklace," he said, indicating a piece similar to the one Frankie wore beneath her shirt, was used by tribal leaders to mark sacred sites. The symbols encoded information about celestial alignments and geographical features. After the tour concluded, Logan approached them directly. "You're Martin's daughter," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving Frankie's face. "I'd know those eyes anywhere." Frankie nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "We need to talk," Luke said. "Earl Bishop sent us. He gave us this." He showed Logan the key. Logan's expression grew grave. "Not here. Follow me." He led them through a staff door and down a labyrinth of corridors lined with storage cabinets and preservation equipment. Finally, they reached a small office tucked away in a corner of the building. Logan ushered them inside, locked the door, and drew the blinds. "I've been waiting for this day," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Martin said you would come eventually, that you would find your way back to the truth." "What truth?" Frankie asked. What did Martin Jameson discover that was worth destroying his life over?" Logan moved to a painting on the wall, a landscape depicting a dramatic mesa at sunset. He swung it aside, revealing a small safe. Using Earl's key and a combination from memory, he opened it and withdrew a leather portfolio. "Martin discovered something that would have changed the legal landscape of the Southwest," Logan explained, setting the portfolio on his desk. "Irrefutable proof that certain lands claimed by mining corporations rightfully belong to the Navajo Nation under the original treaties." He opened the portfolio, revealing maps, photographs, and treaty documents. These lands contain some of the richest uranium deposits in the country. Davidson Corp had already invested millions in preparation for mining operations when Martin made his discovery. "And they couldn't let that stand," Luke said grimly. "Precisely. When Martin went public with his preliminary findings, they moved quickly. Planted evidence to suggest he had stolen artifacts, destroyed his reputation. But Martin had already secured the most damning evidence: documentation that Davidson executives knew about the true boundaries and deliberately falsified surveys. "So they faked my death," Frankie said softly. "Used me as leverage against him." Logan nodded, his eyes sad. "They threatened his entire family. Said if he didn't surrender the evidence and recant his claims, none of you would be safe. The drowning accident was a warning. But instead of giving in, he hid me," Frankie continued, the pieces falling into place. "Created a new identity for me with the Reynolds family." Martin knew Jim and Margaret Reynolds from the museum. Jim was one of the few who stood by Martin when the accusations began. They had 2 children already, wanted a third. It seemed providential. "And my mother, Clara, the car accident?" Logan's face darkened. "No accident. She had discovered communications between Davidson and certain government officials. They couldn't risk her going public." "And the other children? James and Anna?" Frankie asked, suddenly realizing she had siblings she'd never met. "Safe. James lives in Oregon now, a professor like his father. Anna is in Europe, an archaeologist. Martin sent them away before things escalated. They believed their sister drowned. It was safer that way." Frankie sat heavily in a chair, overwhelmed by the revelations. "So what did Martin hide in the RV? What is Davidson still looking for after all these years?" "The original treaties, photographic evidence of the boundary markers, geological surveys proving Davidson knew the truth, and most importantly, the location of a sacred site that definitively establishes Navajo ownership under federal law." Logan turned to the pendant around Frankie's neck. "May I?" Frankie removed the necklace and handed it to him. Logan examined it carefully, then placed it beside a map from the portfolio. "This pendant is both a key and a map. The symbols correspond to landmarks in Navajo territory, but only someone who knows what to look for can interpret it correctly. And Martin hid the instructions in the RV," Luke concluded, "which Davidson now has." Logan shook his head. Not instructions. A trigger. Martin was brilliant with mechanical systems. He designed the RV's interior with hidden panels that would only reveal themselves when certain conditions were met. Conditions only Eleanor would know instinctively. A noise in the corridor outside made them all freeze. Footsteps approached, then passed by without stopping. Logan relaxed slightly but kept his voice low. The RV contains a hidden compartment that will only open when the pendant is placed in a specific location on a specific date with specific astronomical alignments. Martin encoded these requirements into the carvings he made throughout the vehicle's interior. My birthday, Frankie whispered. The marks would only align on my birthday. Logan looked impressed. Yes, how did you know? I found a calendar in the RV with July 12th circled every year, and there were these strange notches in the window frames that didn't make sense from a construction standpoint. Martin said you had his eye for detail. Logan smiled sadly. The compartment contains everything needed to prove Davidson's fraud and secure the land rights for the Navajo people. It's worth billions in mineral rights and priceless in cultural significance. And now Davidson has the RV, Luke said grimly. They're tearing it apart looking for the evidence. They won't find it, Logan assured them, not without the pendant and the knowledge of how to use it. Martin designed the compartment to self-destruct if forced. The contents would be destroyed before they could be compromised. A soft chime from Logan's desk phone interrupted them. He answered it, listened briefly, then hung up with a troubled expression. Security reports unusual activity at the staff entrance. Multiple individuals asking for me by name. He moved to a computer monitor and pulled up the security feed. Oh no. The screen showed Blackwood and several men in dark suits entering the museum through a side door, led by a nervous-looking security guard. They found us, Frankie said, already gathering the documents. We need to go. This way. Logan moved to a bookshelf, pulled a specific volume, and the entire shelf swung outward, revealing a narrow passage. Service corridor, leads to the loading dock. Take the portfolio, find the RV before they decode its secrets. As they hurried into the passage, an elderly man appeared in the doorway of the office, a museum guide Frankie recognized from the lobby. His eyes widened at the sight of the open secret door. Charlie, what's going on here? His gaze fell on Frankie, and his expression transformed from confusion to shock. My God, you're Eleanor Jameson. I'd know that face anywhere. You look just like Clara. Logan tensed. Thomas, these people are with me. It's confidential museum business. But Thomas was staring at Frankie, his eyes filling with tears. I knew your father. I was there the day they brought those false accusations against him. You were just a little thing then, always following him around the museum. Thomas, please, Logan urged. We don't have time. You used to love the dinosaur exhibit, Thomas continued, lost in memory. Your father would lift you up to see the Tyrannosaurus. You called it the Chomper. The phrase triggered something in Frankie's mind. A flash of memory, a deep voice, strong hands lifting her toward an enormous skull with gleaming teeth. The Chomper, she whispered. I remember. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, growing louder. Logan pushed Frankie and Luke toward the passage. Go, now. I'll delay them. He turned to Thomas. Not a word about who you saw, old friend. Lives depend on it. Thomas straightened, understanding dawning in his aged face. Of course not. I'll help. As the secret door swung closed behind them, Frankie and Luke heard Thomas loudly engaging Logan in a discussion about catalog errors, his voice carrying deliberately down the hall toward the approaching footsteps. The service corridor was dimly lit and smelled of dust and cleaning chemicals. They moved quickly, following exit signs toward the loading dock. Behind them, they heard the muffled sounds of raised voices, Blackwood's distinctive tone cutting through the museum's hushed atmosphere. They emerged onto the loading dock just as a delivery truck was pulling away. The driver, seeing their urgent gestures, slowed down enough for them to leap aboard. As the truck turned onto the main road, Frankie caught a glimpse of Blackwood bursting onto the loading dock, his face contorted with rage. Safe for the moment, they huddled among boxes of museum promotional materials, catching their breath. We need to find the RV, Frankie said, clutching the portfolio. According to Logan, It contains everything needed to bring down Davidson Corp. And restore the land to the Navajo. Luke pulled out his phone. I think I know how to track it. Earl's truck had a GPS tracker, part of his recovery service for stolen vehicles. If the RV was on his lot, he might have tagged it too. A few minutes of searching brought up Earl's tracking app. Luke entered the credentials they'd found in the workshop. Got it, he said triumphantly. The RV is moving, heading northeast on Highway 89. Toward Navajo territory, Frankie realized. They must have figured out part of the puzzle. The delivery truck eventually stopped at a shopping mall, allowing them to slip away unnoticed. They called Ella, who reported that Earl was recovering well and the doctor had returned for a follow-up visit. Where are you? Ella asked. Phoenix, but we're heading north. Davidson has the RV and they're taking it toward Navajo land. We need to intercept them before they figure out how to access the hidden compartment. I'll meet you, Ella decided. Earl says he can manage without me now. The doctor's going to stay with him tonight. They arranged to rendezvous at a gas station outside Flagstaff, then find a way to follow the RV's GPS signal to its destination. As they waited for the bus that would take them north, Frankie studied the pendant, tracing the intricate symbols with her finger. My father designed this, she said softly, created this puzzle specifically for me to solve someday. He must have had incredible faith in you, Luke observed, to entrust you with something so important, even knowing you might never discover the truth about your past. The symbols on the pendant seemed to shift in the light, revealing new patterns, new possibilities. Frankie felt a strange certainty growing within her, that she would understand what to do when the time came, that some part of her had always known her true purpose. The bus journey passed in tense silence, both of them watching for any sign of pursuit. By evening, they reached the rendezvous point, where Ella was waiting with a rented SUV and supplies. The RV has stopped moving, she informed them, showing the tracker app on her tablet. It's in a remote area about 40 miles north of here, on the edge of Navajo territory. They studied satellite images of the location, a flat area surrounded by dramatic mesas and rock formations. The perfect place to examine the RV without interruption. Davidson must have figured out that the pendant is the key, Frankie reasoned. They're probably trying to replicate its function or force the compartment open, which would destroy the evidence, Luke reminded them. We need to get there fast. As they drove north, following the GPS signal along increasingly remote roads, Frankie opened Logan's portfolio. Among the documents was a handwritten letter addressed to My Eleanor, when you find your way back to the truth. With trembling hands, she unfolded it, recognizing the handwriting from the note she'd found in the RV. My dearest daughter, it began, if you are reading this, then you have discovered your true identity and the burden that comes with it. I am sorry for the life I could not give you, for the family that was torn apart to protect a truth bigger than all of us. Know that every day without you has been a wound that never healed, but the knowledge that you were safe with good people gave me the strength to continue. What I discovered was not just archaeological treasure, but justice long denied. The land Davidson seeks to exploit is sacred to the Navajo people, not merely spiritually, but legally. The evidence I've preserved proves beyond doubt that the boundaries were deliberately falsified, that sacred sites were erased from official records to facilitate mining operations. The pendant you now possess is both map and key. It will guide you to the heart of the sacred site where the final proof awaits. Trust your instincts, Eleanor. You spent the first 5 years of your life learning the patterns and symbols of the land. That knowledge lives in you still, beneath the surface of memory. I do not know what kind of woman you have become, but I know the spirit that burned in you as a child, curious, determined, unafraid. Whatever name you bear now, whatever life you have lived, that spirit remains your birthright. They may have taken your identity, but they cannot take your heritage. It lives in your blood, in your bones, in the birthmark on your wrist that matches the constellation above the sacred mountain. Find the truth, Eleanor. Complete what I could not. And know that you were loved fiercely, completely, eternally by a father who had to let you go to keep you safe. Until we meet again, either in this world or the next, your father, Martin. Tears streamed down Frankie's face as she finished reading. For the first time since discovering her true identity, she felt a connection to Martin Jameson, not as an abstract figure from her hidden past, but as her father, a man who had sacrificed everything to protect both his daughter and his principles. "They can take my identity," she whispered, clutching the pendant, "but they can never take my heritage." As darkness fell, they approached the coordinates where the RV had stopped. Killing the headlights, they drove the final mile guided only by moonlight. Cresting a small rise, they saw it. The Winnebago, illuminated by portable floodlights, surrounded by black SUVs. Men in tactical gear patrolled the perimeter, while others worked inside the vehicle. Blackwood stood apart, speaking urgently into a satellite phone. Even from a distance, his frustration was evident in his rigid posture and sharp gestures. "They haven't found it yet," Luke observed. "They're getting desperate." "Good," Frankie said, studying the scene through binoculars. "But we still need to get past all those guards." The pendant around her neck seemed to grow warmer against her skin. Looking up at the night sky, she noticed something significant. The stars aligned in a pattern matching the symbols on the pendant. And tomorrow was July 12th, her birthday. "It has to be tomorrow," she realized. "The compartment will only open on my birthday when the stars align with the symbols on the pendant." "So we wait," Ella said. "Let them get frustrated and careless. Then make our move just before dawn." As they settled in to watch from their hidden vantage point, Frankie held the pendant up to the starlight. The silver disc caught the celestial glow, the symbols illuminated as if from within. Tomorrow she would reclaim not just the evidence her father had hidden, but her own heritage, a birthright stolen by corporate greed and protected by a father's desperate love. "They can take my identity," she repeated, the words becoming a promise, a declaration of war. "But they can never take my heritage." The stars stretched across the night sky like ancient runes as Frankie, Luke, and Ella drove through the darkness. They had been following the RV's GPS signal for hours, winding along increasingly narrow roads that cut through the heart of Navajo territory. Desert gave way to mesas, their silhouettes dark against the star-filled sky. Frankie sat at the wheel, her knuckles white with tension, the silver pendant warm against her skin. "Turn left up ahead," Luke directed, studying the GPS. "About half a mile, then we should be able to see their position." Frankie nodded, easing the vehicle onto an unmarked dirt road. As they climbed a gentle slope, something stirred inside her. A strange familiarity with this landscape she couldn't possibly know. The shapes of the mesas against the horizon, the way the starlight cast shadows across the red earth, it all resonated with something deep in her memory, like the echo of a forgotten song. "I've been here before," she murmured, slowing the car. "I know this place." Ella leaned forward from the back seat. "How could you? You were only 5 when you left." "I don't know, but I recognize those formations." Frankie pointed to a cluster of rock pinnacles silhouetted against the night sky. "The Three Sisters, that's what he called them." "Who called them that?" Luke asked. "My father, Martin." The name felt strange on her tongue, simultaneously foreign and familiar. "He brought me here. I remember sitting on his shoulders, watching the sunrise." They crested the ridge, and Frankie instinctively cut the engine and headlights. Below them, nestled in a small valley between 2 towering mesas, was the Winnebago, their Winnebago, illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns. Davidson's SUVs were nowhere to be seen. "That can't be right," Luke whispered. "The tracker shows them right there, but where are Blackwood and his men?" As they watched, an elderly figure emerged from the RV, silhouetted against the warm light spilling from its windows. He stood tall, despite his years, his silver hair tied back in a traditional Navajo style, his posture suggesting quiet strength. "Who is that?" Ella murmured. "Only one way to find out," Frankie replied, reaching for the door handle. They approached cautiously, using the shadows for cover. As they drew closer, the man turned toward them, as if he had sensed their presence despite their stealth. "Eleanor Jameson," he called, his voice carrying clearly through the still desert air. "I have waited many years for your return." Frankie froze, her hand instinctively closing around the pendant. "How do you know who I am?" The man smiled, the weathered lines of his face deepening. "The daughter of Martin Jameson carries her father's spirit in her eyes. I would know them anywhere." He gestured toward the RV. "Please come inside. The night is cold, and we have much to discuss." Luke and Ella exchanged wary glances, but Frankie felt an inexplicable trust in this stranger. She stepped forward into the light. "I'm Frankie Reynolds," she said, extending her hand. "And these are my siblings, Luke and Ella." "Joseph White Eagle," the man replied, taking her hand in both of his. "I was your father's friend and research partner, and I have been the guardian of this vehicle since he entrusted it to me." "But how did you get it?" Luke asked. "We tracked it here from Earl Bishop's junkyard after Davidson Corp took it." Joseph's eyes twinkled with mischief. "Davidson found a very convincing replica. Earl and I prepared it years ago in case they ever discovered the real one. When you left the junkyard, I received Earl's signal and moved this one to safety while they seized the decoy." He led them into the RV, and Frankie gasped. The interior was nothing like the decrepit shell she had begun renovating. Instead, it had been lovingly restored to its original condition, with polished wood paneling, comfortable seating, and intricate carvings along every surface. The familiar shape was there, but transformed, like seeing a faded photograph suddenly restored to vibrant color. "You've kept it all these years," she whispered, running her hand along the smooth wooden table. "Martin asked me to," Joseph replied. "He said that someday his daughter would find her way back to her heritage, and when that day came, she would need what was hidden here." Frankie turned slowly, taking in the details she had missed during her brief time with the vehicle. The carvings she had assumed were decorative now revealed themselves as intricate symbols, constellations, landscape features, and abstract patterns that seemed to tell a story. "Those are your father's work," Joseph said, watching her examine the carvings. "He spent months perfecting them, encoding everything you would need to know." "Need to know for what?" Joseph's expression grew solemn. "To reclaim your birthright, to restore justice to the Navajo people, to complete what Martin began." He touched the pendant around her neck. "I see you found the key." "My mother kept it," Frankie explained. "She left it for me in her personal effects." "Margaret Reynolds was a remarkable woman," Joseph nodded. "She understood what was at stake from the beginning." "Which was what, exactly?" Luke interjected. "We know Davidson wants to mine Navajo land, and that Martin found evidence supporting the tribe's claim to it. But what makes this particular site so important?" Joseph gestured for them to sit around the table. "It is not just land," he began, his voice taking on the cadence of a storyteller. "It is the heart of our people's connection to this earth. The site Martin discovered is one of our most sacred places, a portal between worlds in our tradition, where our ancestors first emerged onto this plane of existence." He spread a map across the table, pointing to a location marked with a symbol matching one on Frankie's pendant. "Here, the Cave of Emergence. For generations, its exact location was kept secret, passed down only through oral tradition, the U.S. Government's original treaties with the Navajo Nation specifically protected sacred sites, but over time the boundaries were adjusted by those seeking mineral wealth. And Davidson Corp found uranium there," Ella said. "The richest deposit in the Southwest," Joseph confirmed, "worth billions." They falsified surveys, bribed officials, and gradually rewrote history to claim the land was never part of Navajo territory. "Until my father found proof otherwise," Frankie said quietly. Joseph nodded. "Martin discovered the original boundary markers, stone cairns carved with symbols that correspond to astronomical alignments. He found journal entries from the original surveyors explicitly noting the Cave of Emergence as protected land. And most damning of all, he uncovered internal Davidson communications acknowledging the true boundaries and discussing how to circumvent them. So they destroyed his reputation, Luke concluded, made him look like a thief and a fraud. And when that wasn't enough, they threatened his family, Joseph added. The drowning accident was meant to show him how vulnerable his children were. So he made the most painful choice a father can make. He sent you away, Eleanor, to protect both you and the truth. Frankie's throat tightened. The weight of her father's sacrifice pressed down on her. A man who had given up his daughter to protect both her and a principle larger than himself. "The evidence is hidden inside this RV?" she asked. "Not precisely inside," Joseph smiled. "The carvings are the key. They form a map that can only be read when the light strikes them at a specific angle, an angle that occurs only once a year." "On my birthday," Frankie realized. "July 12th. Joseph's eyes widened with approval. "You truly are Martin's daughter. Yes, tomorrow morning as the sun rises, its light will pass through specific points in the RV's windows, illuminating certain carvings while leaving others in shadow. The pattern will reveal the exact location of the cave of emergence and the evidence your father concealed there. Frankie touched one of the intricate carvings, feeling the careful craftsmanship beneath her fingertips. He created all this for me to find someday. He believed in you, Joseph said simply, even knowing you might grow up with no memory of him, no knowledge of your true heritage. He trusted that if you ever discovered the truth, you would choose to finish what he started. As the night deepened, they shared stories around the table. Joseph spoke of Martin Jameson, not the disgraced archaeologist of newspaper headlines, but the passionate scholar, the devoted father, the man who had recognized the sacredness of Navajo culture and fought to protect it. He loved this land, Joseph said, gesturing toward the mesas visible through the window, not as a resource to be exploited, but as a living entity with its own spirit and meaning. He understood what few outsiders ever grasp, that the land does not belong to us, we belong to the land. Frankie listened, hungry for every detail about the father she couldn't remember. What about my mother, Clara? Joseph's eyes softened. Clara was his compass. A botanist by training, she cataloged indigenous plants and their traditional uses. She was the one who first noticed the discrepancies in the official boundary surveys, when plant communities that should have been protected were suddenly outside tribal lands. He reached into a drawer and withdrew a photograph. Martin and Clara standing before a spectacular sunset, arms around each other, laughing. They were partners in every sense. When David Ian threatened your family, Clara wanted to fight publicly. Martin favored a more strategic approach. In the end, they compromised. He would gather irrefutable evidence while she protected the children. But she died in a car accident, Frankie said quietly. Joseph's expression darkened. No accident. Davidson's security chief arranged it after discovering she had copied internal documents. Her death was the final straw that convinced Martin to send you away and go into hiding himself. Luke, who had been examining the carvings along the walls, turned to Joseph. If Martin went into hiding, where is he now? Is he still alive? A shadow passed over Joseph's face. I do not know. We arranged for him to disappear after securing you with the Reynolds family. He contacted me periodically over the years, always from different locations. His last message came 5 years ago, warning that Davidson was getting closer to finding the RV. Since then, silence. As midnight approached, Joseph showed them to sleeping areas within the RV, bunks hidden behind decorative panels, ingeniously designed to maximize the limited space. Rest now, he advised. Tomorrow will test all of us. But sleep eluded Frankie. She lay awake, staring at the carved ceiling, tracing patterns with her eyes. Fragments of memories surfaced, a deep voice reading bedtime stories, the smell of sage and cedar, a woman's laughter. Were these genuine recollections of her first family, or just her mind trying to fill the gaps? She slipped out of her bunk and moved to the table, where Luke sat reviewing the documents from Logan's portfolio. Can't sleep either, he asked without looking up. Too much to process, she admitted, sitting across from him. Yesterday I was Frankie Reynolds, mechanic with $1 to her name. Now I'm Eleanor Jameson, key to a 30-year conspiracy and guardian of an indigenous people's heritage. It's a lot. Luke set down the papers, studying her face. You know, you don't have to choose between them. Frankie Reynolds or Eleanor Jameson, they're both you. Are they? I don't feel like either one right now. Who our parents are shapes us, but it doesn't define us, Luke said gently. Our dad knew that. He and Mom raised you as their own, not because they wanted to erase who you were, but because they wanted to protect who you could become. Frankie's eyes filled with tears. I wish I could have thanked him. Told him I understood why he never said anything. He knew, Luke assured her. In his own way, he was preparing you your whole life, teaching you to fix things, to see patterns, to value history. He was keeping your father's spirit alive in you without ever saying his name. From the shadows near the bunks, Ella's voice joined them. He was so proud of you, Frankie. Even when you two fought about selling the shop, he told me afterward, that girl has fire in her soul, just like her father. She moved to join them at the table. I thought he meant himself, but now I wonder if he was talking about Martin. As dawn approached, Joseph rose and prepared a simple breakfast. They ate in contemplative silence, as the eastern sky gradually lightened from black to deep blue to pale lavender. "It is time," Joseph announced, clearing away the dishes. "Eleanor, place the pendant here." He indicated a small indentation in the table's center. Frankie removed the necklace and set the silver disc in the designated spot. It fit perfectly, as if the table had been built around it. "Now we wait for the sun," Joseph said, taking a seat by the window. The minutes stretched like hours as the horizon grew brighter. Then suddenly the first ray of sunlight crested the distant mesa. It streamed through the RV's eastern window, striking a crystal prism Joseph had placed there. The light split into a rainbow that danced across the walls, illuminating certain carvings while leaving others in shadow. As the sun rose higher, the pattern of light shifted, creating new connections between the symbols. Frankie watched transfixed as a map emerged from the seemingly random decorations. Mesas, canyons, and rivers revealed in the interplay of light and shadow. "There," Joseph pointed, "the cave of emergence." Frankie saw it now, a specific point where multiple light beams converged, highlighting a carving of a cave mouth surrounded by spiraling patterns. "I know this place," she whispered. "It's the canyon behind the Three Sisters." Joseph nodded approvingly. "Your spirit remembers what your mind has forgotten. Your father brought you there as a child." As the sun continued its ascent, the light pattern faded, the map disappearing as quickly as it had formed. But Frankie had memorized it. The location burned into her consciousness as if she had always known it. "We should go now," Joseph said, retrieving the pendant. "Davidson's men will be searching these lands today, knowing the significance of the date." They gathered what they needed, water, flashlights, the documents from Logan's portfolio, and set out in Joseph's rugged Jeep. The morning air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of sage and juniper. As they drove, Joseph pointed out landmarks, naming them in both English and Navajo, explaining their significance in tribal history. For Frankie, each name, each story resonated with something deep inside her, a connection to this land that transcended memory. "I feel like I'm coming home," she said softly, "to a place I never knew I left." They parked the Jeep in a concealed arroyo and then continued on foot, following a narrow trail that wound between towering rock formations. The Three Sisters loomed ahead, three slender spires of red sandstone reaching toward the sky like ancient guardians. "The sacred site lies just beyond," Joseph explained as they climbed. "Few outsiders have ever seen it. Your father was one of the few non-Navajo permitted to study it, because he understood its true value was not material, but spiritual." As they rounded a bend in the trail, Frankie stopped abruptly, overcome by a vivid memory, sitting on a man's shoulders, tiny hands clutching his hair, laughing as he pointed out shapes in the clouds above these very rocks. "I was here with him," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "With my father, Martin." Joseph placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "The land remembers you, Eleanor, and now you remember it." They continued in reverent silence until they reached a narrow crevice in the cliff face, nearly invisible unless one knew exactly where to look. Joseph led them through the opening, which widened into a passage large enough to walk upright. The temperature dropped as they moved deeper into the earth, the sunlight gradually giving way to darkness. "Use your lights now," Joseph instructed, switching on his flashlight. "And remember, we walk on sacred ground." The passage opened into a breathtaking cavern, its walls adorned with ancient pictographs, human figures, animals, celestial bodies, all rendered in fading red and white pigments. Stalactites hung from the ceiling like stone icicles, water dripping from their tips into small pools that glimmered in the flashlight beams. "The cave of emergence," Joseph said, his voice echoing slightly. "According to our traditions, this is where the first people came into this world from the one below." Frankie moved forward as if in a trance, drawn to a specific section of wall where the pictographs seemed more recent than the others. "Here," she said, running her hand along the cool stone. "There's something behind this." Joseph nodded. "Your father discovered that this section of wall was added later, a false panel hiding a natural chamber beyond. But he sealed it in a way that only the pendant could open." Well, Frankie examined the wall more closely, noticing a small curved indentation that matched the shape of her pendant. She placed the silver disc against the stone, and to her amazement, it adhered as if magnetized. The moment it made contact, a series of soft clicks emanated from within the wall. "Turn it clockwise," Joseph instructed. Like a key, she rotated the pendant, feeling resistance, then a satisfying click as something unlocked. A section of the wall swung inward, revealing a small chamber beyond. Inside, protected from moisture and time in a sealed metal case, lay the evidence Martin Jameson had sacrificed everything to preserve. The original survey maps with the true boundaries clearly marked, photographs of the ancient boundary cairns with their celestial alignment markings, and most damning of all, internal Davidson Corporation documents acknowledging the sacred site's protected status while outlining strategies to circumvent it. This is it, Luke breathed, examining the papers. This proves everything. The land was never legally open for mining. And here's the connection to Davidson, Ella added, pointing to signatures on the internal memos. Blackwood's name is on these documents from 30 years ago. He's been part of this from the beginning. As they carefully documented and photographed everything with their phones, Joseph kept watch at the cavern entrance. Suddenly he returned, his expression grave. Davidson's men, he whispered. They've found us. At least 6 of them with Blackwood in the lead. Frankie's heart raced. How? We were so careful. They must have been watching the sacred sites, knowing their significance to the Navajo, Joseph reasoned. We need to move the evidence now. But before they could gather everything, flashlight beams cut through the darkness of the outer cavern. Blackwood's voice echoed off the stone walls. Ms. Jameson, or should I say Miss Dawes? Reynolds, I know you're in there. Let's handle this civilly, shall we? Luke doused their lights, whispering urgently, Is there another way out? Joseph shook his head. Not from this chamber. Frankie made a quick decision. Ella, take the documents. You and Luke find a place to hide in the main cavern. There must be crevices or formations large enough to conceal you. Joseph and I will distract them. That's suicide, Luke protested. They want me and the evidence, Frankie replied. I'll give them half of what they want. Buy you time to escape with what matters. Before they could argue further, she stepped out of the hidden chamber, the pendant clutched in her hand. Joseph followed, sealing the wall behind them to conceal Luke and Ella's presence. Blackwood stood in the center of the main cavern, flanked by armed men in tactical gear. His silver hair gleamed in the harsh beams of their flashlights, his expensive suit incongruous in the ancient space. "We saw Jameson," he said, his voice silky with triumph. "Or do you prefer Frankie? I must say you've led us on quite a chase." "It's over, Blackwood," Frankie replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "We know everything about my father, about Davidson's fraud, about what really happened to my mother." Blackwood smiled thinly. "What we have is a difference of historical interpretation. Native land claims are notoriously fluid. Your father was simply unable to accept the pragmatic reality of progress." "You mean the pragmatic reality of stealing sacred land for profit?" Joseph interjected. Blackwood's gaze flickered to him dismissively. "Ah, Mr. White Eagle. Still clinging to outdated superstitions, I see." He turned back to Frankie. "Whatever you think you've discovered here won't matter. Davidson Corporation has operated within the legal framework for decades. One disgraced archaeologist's theories won't change that." "They're not theories," Frankie countered. "They're facts. Facts that your company has worked very hard to bury, along with my mother." A flash of anger crossed Blackwood's face. Clara Jameson's death was unfortunate, but accidents happen. "It was no accident," Frankie said. "Just like my drowning wasn't an accident. Just like my father's disgrace wasn't an accident. It was all part of Davidson's campaign to silence the truth." Blackwood sighed dramatically. "This pointless debate wastes everyone's time. Where are the documents Martin hid? Give them to me now, and perhaps we can reach an accommodation that benefits everyone." "You mean like the accommodation you offered my father? Surrender the evidence or watch his family die?" "Your father made his choice," Blackwood replied coldly. "And now you must make yours." He gestured to one of his men, who stepped forward and grabbed Joseph, pressing a gun to his head. "The documents, Miss Jameson, now." Frankie's mind raced. She needed to buy time for Luke and Ella to escape with the evidence. Her hand closed around her father's pocket knife in her jacket pocket, the one Luke had given her, passed down from their father. As her fingers traced its worn surface, She felt something she hadn't noticed before. Small notches carved into the handle, forming a pattern similar to the symbols on the cavern walls. Suddenly she understood. The knife wasn't just a family heirloom, it was another key, designed by her adoptive father based on Martin's research. The documents are hidden where only I can access them, she said, stalling. But I'll take you there if you release Joseph. Blackwood considered this, then nodded to his man, who lowered his weapon but kept a firm grip on Joseph's arm. Show me, Blackwood demanded. Frankie led them deeper into the cavern, toward a wall covered with particularly intricate pictographs. One design caught her eye, a spiral pattern with a small depression at its center, exactly the size of her father's knife handle. The evidence is behind this wall, she said, approaching the spiral, but it requires a specific key. She removed the knife from her pocket, feeling Blackwood tense behind her. Before he could stop her, she pressed the handle into the depression and turned it like a key. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a low rumbling filled the cavern as ancient mechanisms designed by the original inhabitants and maintained by generations of Navajo guardians activated within the stone. The floor began to shake and small stones rained down from the ceiling. "What have you done?" Blackwood demanded, grabbing her arm. "Triggered the cave's defense system," Joseph answered, a smile spreading across his weathered face. "Martin studied it extensively. The ancient ones built it to protect their sacred knowledge from those who would misuse it." The rumbling intensified. Larger rocks began falling now, forcing Blackwood's men to scatter for cover. In the confusion, Joseph broke free from his captor and shoved Blackwood hard, sending him stumbling into one of his subordinates. "Run!" Joseph shouted to Frankie. "Find your siblings and get out." As Blackwood regained his balance, he drew a pistol from inside his jacket. "Enough games," he snarled, aiming at Frankie. Joseph threw himself forward, tackling Blackwood just as he fired. The bullet went manian, striking the cavern wall, but a second shot found its mark, and Joseph cried out in pain, clutching his shoulder as he fell. "Joseph!" Frankie screamed, rushing to his side. The rumbling reached a crescendo. A massive crack appeared in the cavern ceiling, sending Blackwood's men into panic. They fled toward the entrance, abandoning their employer in their desperation to escape. Luke and Ella emerged from their hiding place, the metal case of documents clutched in Ella's arms. "We need to get out now," Luke shouted over the din, helping Frankie support the wounded Joseph. Blackwood scrambled to his feet, fury contorting his features. "You'll never leave this cave alive," he snarled, raising his gun again. But before he could fire, a section of ceiling collapsed directly above him. Blackwood looked up in horror, and tons of rock plummeted toward him. He dove aside, but not quickly enough. A massive boulder struck his leg, pinning him to the ground. He screamed in agony, the gun falling from his grasp. "Help me," he pleaded as more rocks continued to fall around him. Despite everything, Frankie hesitated. Luke saw her expression and understood immediately. "Go with Ella and Joseph," he said. "Get them and the evidence out. I'll help Blackwood." "Luke, no, we're not like them," he insisted. "Go." As Frankie and Ella supported the injured Joseph toward the exit, Luke struggled to free Blackwood from the fallen rocks. The cavern continued to collapse around them, the ancient defense system thoroughly awakened. They emerged into blinding sunlight just as a cloud of dust billowed from the cave entrance. Blackwood's men had fled, their vehicles vanishing in the distance. For a terrible moment, Frankie thought Luke was lost. Then he staggered out of the dust cloud, supporting the limping Blackwood. "The inner chamber collapsed completely," Luke reported, easing Blackwood to the ground. "But the main cave entrance is still intact." Joseph, despite his injury, smiled weakly. "The sacred site protects itself. The inner chamber will remain sealed until the Navajo elders choose to open it again." In the distance, sirens wailed. Joseph nodded in satisfaction. "I contacted the tribal police before we entered the cave. They will be here soon, along with federal agents who have been investigating Davidson for years." Blackwood, his leg clearly broken, glared up at them with impotent rage. "This changes nothing. Davidson has too much power, too many connections." Frankie knelt beside him, holding up her phone. "Maybe once, but I've been recording this entire conversation, including your admission about my mother's accident. And we have the original documents proving Davidson's fraud." She stood, looking down at the man who had destroyed her family. Your time is over, Blackwood. My father's truth will finally be heard. The aftermath unfolded with dizzying speed. Tribal police secured the site and took Blackwood into custody. Joseph's wounds were treated by paramedics, while federal agents collected the evidence and took statements from all of them. News crews arrived by helicopter, broadcasting the discovery of documents proving decades of corporate fraud against the Navajo Nation. In the days that followed, the full story emerged. Davidson Corporation's stock plummeted as investigations were announced. Former executives came forward with additional evidence of wrongdoing, hoping to secure leniency. The Department of Interior initiated proceedings to formally recognize the sacred site's protected status, while the Navajo Tribal Council prepared legal actions to reclaim all misappropriated lands. Earl Bishop recovered from his injuries and joined them at Joseph's home, where they gathered to watch the news coverage of Martin Jamison's posthumous vindication. Academic institutions issued formal apologies for their treatment of him, and museums began returning the artifacts they had removed from his possession during the scandal. I only wish he could see this, Frankie said, as they watched footage of Davidson executives being led away in handcuffs. Perhaps he can, Joseph suggested. We believe the spirits of our ancestors remain connected to the sacred places they protected in life. A week later, as the media frenzy began to subside, Frankie returned to Earl's junkyard. The rusted Winnebago, the decoy that Davidson had seized and then abandoned, still sat where they had left it, a silent witness to the beginning of her journey. What will you do with it now? Earl asked, standing beside her. Frankie ran her hand along the faded metal siding. Finish what I started. Make it shine again. Over the following months, as legal proceedings against Davidson continued, Frankie threw herself into restoring the RV. Luke and Ella helped when they could, as did Earl and Joseph. They replaced the rotted floors, installed new windows, rebuilt the engine, and carefully recreated the interior, incorporating elements of both Navajo design and Martin's original carvings. Joseph taught Frankie about her Navajo heritage, sharing stories and traditions that had been denied to her for 30 years. She absorbed it all hungrily, feeling the missing pieces of her identity gradually falling into place. Yet she didn't abandon her identity as Frankie Reynolds. The skills her adoptive father had taught her, the values her adoptive mother had instilled, these remained fundamental parts of who she was. I'm both, she explained to Joseph one evening as they worked on the RV's interior. Eleanor Jamison and Frankie Reynolds. 2 families, 2 heritages, 1 person. When the restoration was complete, Frankie added a final touch, a hand-painted sign on the RV's side that read the next story, with smaller text beneath it, never forgotten. Inside, she created a small museum of sorts, with photographs, artifacts, and educational materials about Navajo culture and the battle to protect sacred lands. A mobile museum, she explained to Luke and Ella. I'm going to travel to schools, community centers, anywhere people need to learn about what happened here. Not just the corporate fraud, but the importance of cultural heritage and sacred spaces. Dad would be proud, Luke said, squeezing her shoulder. Both of them would. On a crisp autumn morning, Frankie prepared for her first journey in the restored RV. Earl, Joseph, Luke, and Ella gathered to see her off, each having contributed something to her new mission. You'll come back often? Ella asked, hugging her tightly. Of course, Frankie promised. This is still home. You're still my family. As she climbed into the driver's seat, Joseph approached with a small package wrapped in soft leather. A gift, he said, placing it in her hands. From your father. Inside was a journal, its pages filled with Martin Jamison's handwriting, observations about Navajo culture, sketches of archaeological sites, and most precious of all, personal entries about his family, including dozens of anecdotes about his youngest daughter, Eleanor. He left it with me, Joseph explained, asked me to give it to you if you ever discovered the truth. He wanted you to know who he was and how much he loved you. Tears blurred Frankie's vision as she carefully closed the journal. Thank you, she whispered, embracing the old man, for everything. As she started the engine, Luke called out, Where to first? Frankie smiled. The Navajo Elementary School in Tuba City. They've invited me to speak about sacred sites and preservation. Then wherever the road takes me. She pulled away slowly, watching her family in the rearview mirror, Earl waving vigorously, Joseph standing tall and proud, Luke with his arm around Ella's shoulders. And for just a moment, in the golden morning light, she thought she glimpsed two other figures standing beside them. A man with glasses and a woman with a sunflower in her pointer, both smiling with unmistakable pride. Some rust stains never completely wash away, Frankie murmured to herself as the junkyard receded behind her. But they're evidence of a story worth telling. The RV hummed beneath her hands, restored and renewed, just like the woman driving it, no longer defined by what she had lost, but by what she had found. Not just one heritage, but two. Not just one family, but many. Not just one story, but the next one waiting to be written. I can certainly extend the ending of Legacy from Rust with an additional 1,000 words in English. Here's a continuation from where the story left off. Swept. The RV's wheels rolled smoothly along the highways and back roads of the Southwest, carrying Frankie to the far reaches of Navajo territory. During those first few weeks, she visited 5 schools, 2 local museums, and a conference on indigenous land rights. Each stop added new layers to her understanding of the heritage she was only beginning to reclaim. At the Navajo Elementary School in Tuba City, the children had gathered in the gymnasium, sitting cross-legged on the floor as Frankie showed them photographs of the boundary markers her biological father had discovered. Their eyes widened when she demonstrated how the pendant worked, using a flashlight to create miniature versions of the light patterns that had revealed the hidden map. My father believed that knowledge belongs to the future, she told them, her voice steady despite the emotion tightening her throat. He protected these truths not just for himself or even for the Navajo people, but for all of you, the next generation who will be the guardians of this sacred land. After her presentation, an elderly teacher approached, tears glistening in her eyes. I knew your father, she said, taking Frankie's hands in her weathered ones. Martin used to bring you here when you were no bigger than these children. You would sit in the corner of my classroom, drawing pictures of the 3 sisters while he talked to the principal about protecting our cultural sites. These unexpected connections to her past emerged wherever she traveled. In a trading post outside Window Rock, the owner recognized the pendant around her neck and shared stories of Martin stopping by with his young daughter to purchase supplies before heading into the field. At a community gathering in Kayenta, an old man recalled seeing Clara Jameson collecting plant samples on the eastern slopes of Black Mesa, little Eleanor trailing behind her with a miniature specimen bag of her own. Each story was a fragment of the life she might have lived, pieces of a puzzle she was slowly reassembling. The media attention had faded somewhat as Davidson's legal battles became routine headline fodder, but Frankie still received regular updates from the lawyers handling the case. Davidson Corporation's attempts to fight the evidence had failed spectacularly, especially after 3 former executives turned state's evidence. The corporation was now facing not only massive financial penalties but criminal charges against its top leadership. Blackwood himself was awaiting trial, having been denied bail as a flight risk. One evening, as summer gave way to fall, Frankie parked the RV on a ridge overlooking Monument Valley. The massive sandstone buttes stood silhouetted against the sunset, their ancient shapes casting long shadows across the valley floor. She sat at the wooden table, the same one that had revealed the map, and opened Martin's journal, continuing the nightly ritual of reading one entry before sleep. October 3rd, 1988, she read aloud to the empty RV. Eleanor identified 5 different bird species today without any prompting. Clara says I'm turning our daughter into a scientist before she's even in kindergarten, but I see how she beams with pride when Eleanor explains to her friends about the difference between a hawk and a falcon. The child has an eye for patterns that astonishes me. Today, while examining petroglyphs near Blue Gap, she pointed to a spiral symbol and said, "Daddy, it's moving." At first, I thought she was imagining things, but when I looked more carefully, I realized the spiral was designed to create an optical illusion when viewed in changing light. A 5-year-old spotted what I, with all my training, had missed. Frankie traced her fingers over her father's handwriting, smiling at his obvious pride. These journal entries had become her bedtime stories, a way of connecting with the man she could barely remember. Her phone buzzed with an incoming text, Luke checking in as he did every evening. "Made it to Kayenta," she wrote back. "Meeting with tribal council tomorrow. How's the shop?" Luke had reopened their father's garage, using part of the settlement money from Davidson to update the equipment and hire 2 apprentice mechanics. "Busy," came his reply. "Ella says hi. Joseph called, says he has news. Call him when you can. Joseph had become a constant presence in her life, a bridge between her past and present. Through him, she was learning the Navajo language, absorbing the words like rainwater into parched earth. Sometimes when he taught her certain phrases, they seemed to unlock more fragments of memory. Her mother singing a Navajo lullaby, her father practicing pronunciation as he drove the family RV along these same roads. She dialed Joseph's number, watching as the last rays of sunlight painted the buttes in deepening shades of red and gold. Eleanor, he answered, his voice warm with affection. She had stopped correcting him when he used her birth name. Somehow, coming from him, it felt right. I have news that couldn't wait. The tribal council has found something I think belongs to you. He explained that during the cataloging of returned artifacts from various museums, part of the reparations following the Davidson case, workers had discovered a collection of personal items that had been confiscated from Martin Jameson's office during the original investigation. Among them was a small, leather-bound book with Navajo symbols embossed on the cover. It's addressed to you, Joseph said. A letter of sorts, written by your father in the days after your drowning. He never expected to see you again, but he wanted to leave you his final thoughts in case someday the truth came to light. Frankie's heart pounded in her chest. When can I see it? Tomorrow, if you can make it to the council chambers. I'll be waiting. That night, sleep proved elusive. Frankie lay in the small bunk, staring up at the ceiling where she had recreated some of her father's carvings during the restoration. What final words had Martin Jameson left for the daughter he sacrificed everything to protect? What could possibly encompass the enormity of such a choice? As dawn broke over Monument Valley, she was already on the road, the RV humming beneath her hands. The miles passed in contemplative silence, her mind racing with possibilities. When she finally arrived at the tribal council building, Joseph was waiting outside, his silver hair gleaming in the morning light. Before you read it, he said as they walked through the quiet halls, there's something else you should know. Last week I received a postcard from Nicaragua. No return address, no signature, just a photograph of a dig site and 3 words. Tell her peace. Frankie stopped mid-stride. You think it was from him? From Martin? Joseph's eyes crinkled at the corners. The handwriting matching the letters he sent me years ago. I cannot say for certain, but in my heart I believe your father is alive, watching from a distance, perhaps waiting until it's truly safe to return. The possibility left her breathless. All this time she had assumed Martin Jameson was dead, another victim of Davidson's ruthless campaign. The idea that he might be out there somewhere, that she might one day meet the man whose journals had become so precious to her, opened a door she had thought forever closed. In a small conference room, laid carefully on a velvet cloth, was the book Joseph had described. Small enough to fit in her palm, its leather cover worn smooth by time, the Navajo symbol still visible along its spine. With trembling fingers, Frankie opened it to the first page. To my Eleanor, it began, the handwriting identical to the journal she carried in her backpack. If you are reading these words, then the miracle I scarcely dare hope for has come to pass. You have found your way back to the truth, back to your heritage, back to the land that holds our family's heart. Outside the window, an eagle soared across the crystalline sky, its wings outstretched in freedom, its path directed homeward. Like Frankie herself, it had found its way back to where it belonged, not by forgetting the journey that had carried it away, but by embracing the winds that now brought it home. And somewhere, perhaps, a man with glasses and a professor's bearing watched from afar, waiting for the day when rust would be transformed completely into restoration.